Recording. Okay, so hello everyone, and hello to our esteemed guest, Ann Sussman. Ammar and myself are very happy to be here today with everyone and with Ann, and we're very grateful to Ann that she's come here to show us her research and to show us her very interesting work about basically how we experience the city and how the modern and postmodern architecture makes us disturbed in a sense in the city, and she will show us a lot of like why this is the case, a lot of the reasons why this is the case. But before she starts, allow me to give you a brief introduction on Anne. So Anne is an architect and a researcher dedicated to understanding the emotional and behavioral impact that buildings have on people. So she leads the Human Architecture and Planning Institute, which is abbreviated as HAPPY, and she teaches at Boston Architecture College, where she explores how the human experience drives our interactions with the built environment. Her award-winning book, Cognitive Architecture, utilizes advanced technology like eye tracking and facial analysis to examine both conscious and subconscious responses to design. Through her work and research, she aims to improve urban planning and architecture education by focusing on the hidden human experience. So with that, I'm very happy to give the mic to Anne and thank her again for coming to join us today.
Well, thank you. Let's bring the world together. And if you have any questions, feel free to just reach out and ask me anytime. This is a more informal session. I think that's better. So I'm going to talk about how I graduated architecture in 1994. And what I'm going to talk about are all the things I didn't learn. And how, because we're in a new time now, how we can understand human experience, why feelings matter in a way when I went to architecture school, they were never discussed. And the consequence of that is that often we're building places, like Mohammed said earlier, that just don't feel good. The 21st century paradigm shift is what we're talking about, that we're in a new age of biology. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, based in Paris, announced this in 2012. What they said is each century has been coined by scientific and tech progress. And the 19th century, the age of engineering, we had the first cameras, the first trains, the first bicycles, building out of big buildings out of iron, like the Eiffel Tower, the first recording devices. This changed how people lived and what they did. And then the 20th century, when I was born, we had the first computers, the first X-rays, the first plastics. Now, when I go to the beach in Boston, where I live, what do you think I pick up on the beach? Guess, guys. Come on, Mohammed. What do you think I pick up on the beach?
Not seashells.
No, what do I pick up?
I
Plastic
hope not
probably.
plastic bottles.
Plastic bags.
Plastics, they're everywhere. We invented plastics, not thinking about recycling, right? It totally changed how we live. The first computers, the first credit cards. I mean, that changed amazing. It really totally changed us. And now, according to the OECD, this business nonprofit, now we are in an age of biology. Does anyone know what the picture is on the top left?
Is there a double
That's
helix
DNA,
DNA?
The DNA
double
helix,
helix. Yeah.
right. And in the early 21st century, we sequenced DNA. We now know that over 70% of the DNA in your cells is exactly the same as a zebrafish. Who knew? We now totally, it's a new lens to understand how we live. Now, there's Oscar Sartorius. He ran in the Olympics. Now people without legs, amputees, can run in road races. This didn't happen in the 19th century, and this didn't happen in the 20th. It's a total paradigm shift. And does anyone know what the picture is on the bottom left, at the far left?
Are those neurons?
Neurons. How many neurons do you have?
Couple trillion, right? I think trillions.
It's 86 billion.
Oh,
We have now new understanding about the brain. We can see, we have new tools to understand how we see our world. And that changes everything, just like trains changed our world, just like plastics change our world. And so these new understandings, you can now take a traditional building that's very famous. This is Villa La Rotonda in northern Italy. And you can actually see with eye tracking technology, which measures how her eyes move, that in ways she doesn't realize how she's taking in the building. So this is technologies now that all the business schools, if you go to try to get a marketing degree at a business school in Boston, you have to use this technology or you don't get your master's degree. This shows the non-conscious behavior directing her. The big yellow circles are called fixations. That's where the eye is taking in the detail. And the lines between them are called the facades. And you can now measure exactly how people look at buildings. And you can start to understand also why traditional architecture works. This is a very famous building. An architect copied this building, a version of this building, to build the White House in the United States. The elevation of that White House in the United States, where the president lives, is now on every $20 bill. And what you do when you do these studies, the business world really wants stats, and that's what the scientists want too. They'll have 30 people maybe look at the image with an eye tracking setup to measure how their eyes are moving. And you can see where people look first, second, third, fourth, fifth, often without their conscious awareness. That's the big idea. And what you start to understand about Palladio's villa here is that, oh my gosh, this is called a heat map. It glows reddest where people look most, green where they look less, and has no color where they don't look at all. And you can see here that, oh my gosh, if the building didn't have as many statues, it probably couldn't be as famous. What this reveals is the non-conscious behavior you're doing that's directing your thinking. Do you see it, guys? So where people are really looking, they're looking at the center of the building and the door, but they're really also looking at the statues. Get it? You could suddenly get the stats. This was the setup we used. We were using the same technology. It's from iMotions. It's a company based in Copenhagen, but also in Singapore, in Boston. And it's called multimodality. It combines all the non-conscious human experience to understand human behavior. It's a major tool that Honda, BMW, GM, and the car companies all use. And this was the setup we did. This is a study we did about 10 years ago, where the eye tracker is in the back of the room and the woman's taking this core study. And there's a little camera on the top of the monitor measuring her facial movements. Do you understand it, guys? And so this is what the business world does to really understand human behavior. And basically, this is a quote reputedly by Freud, the famous psychologist. The mind is like an iceberg. It floats with 1/7 of its bulk above water. The big idea is that Freud saw, he never used this tech, but what he saw, he interviewed hundreds of people and he realized their non-conscious was directing them. Well, now we have the tools, eye tracking and other tools to understand how Freud was actually right. The non-conscious directs us. And when you go on the web, you see websites about that. 95% of our brain activity, 95% of our brain activity is beyond our conscious awareness. Where's that? That's from a website on how to design a website. And the basic idea here is also explored in a book by Eric Kandel. He wrote a book called The Age of Insight. He's a Nobel Prize-winning neuroscientist. His book came out in 2012, and he explains how all our conscious thoughts are unconscious first. That's the big idea. And there's so many more talks about this now. There's a TED Talk that's been viewed, I think, over 10 million times now by Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. She says, although many of us may think of ourselves as thinking creatures that feel, that's false. Biologically, we're feeling creatures that think. That's the big idea. Understanding feelings is really, really important. And now we can. And what's very interesting to me, living in Boston, I'm not far from Harvard Business School. They have their own business publication company, and they publish books now. Since 2016, they publish books on emotional intelligence. So you go to Harvard to get a business degree, you're going to study emotional intelligence? What? You have to. That's it. So the business world really gets that emotions matter, and people make their intellectual decisions based on emotional experience, right? So how does this change architecture and planning, understanding emotions? What it means is now we could take a traditional building. This is a building in the city of New York that was recently renovated, and working with Tufts University, we eye tracked it, and you could see how people look at the front of a public building, where she's looking. She doesn't know her eyes are moving, in 15 seconds like that, but we do because now we have the tools to see her non-conscious behavior. And then what you could do is you Photoshop out the arched windows, and this is what really stunned us, that without the detail, the brain doesn't let you look at the building the same way. He doesn't know his brain is making him do this, but I do, and the marketing students in business school do, because they have the tools to see it. That's the amazing thing. So if I asked you, which library do you think people would rather raid in front of while I go park the car? Do they want to wait in front of the library at the left or the library at the right? Where do you think people will more likely wait?
Probably the right? Because it's like less blank walls and more interesting.
Yeah, exactly. I've asked that question to 700 people from around the world. Everyone wants to wait there. Well, they won't know why, but I know why. Because non-consciously, their brain can attach. This is what you do. You get like 30 people to look at each image. And so what's so interesting is when it doesn't have the detail, you see that people find the front door. There's a term they use, TTFF, time to first fixation, where people immediately look. They find the front door in 0.9 seconds, whereas when it has the window, it takes 1.2 seconds. But what's fascinating, almost half the people, 12 of 30, are looking beyond the building by 12 seconds. Whereas in the other building, when it has the original windows, 10.8 are looking beyond, but then by 13 seconds, they're looking back at the building. Non-consciously, your brain can anchor. It can make fixations. It can focus. There's detail to focus on. And that may be connected to why people always want to wait in front of the building on the right. Okay, which is preferable
And if I
here.
can just come for a bit, usually when it comes to this topic, right, people have the two words when it comes to consciousness. So it's conscious. Oh my God, conscious and subconscious. I don't see
No,
using the
no, no,
word.
no, no. That's not the right word. I can send you an article from a Harvard business school article. You always want to use unconscious or non-conscious because subconscious just is not well defined. It's
Mm.
unconscious or non-conscious, pre-conscious, never subconscious. Okay, that's the term we use. All right. In fact, when I published my first book, I did use the word subconscious. Then I was told I had to correct it, and then I told the publisher they have to take out subconscious in every page. It's all unconscious. It's unconscious processing. So you don't realize your brain is doing it, but evolution has decided you had to do this for you to survive. That's the big idea, that your non-conscious experience is directing you. Just like Freud said, the mind is an iceberg. Most of it's below water. That's it. So which is preferable here? This is a parking garage in the city of Somerville. Which one's parking? The one on the left or the one on the right? Where do you think people will more likely wait in front of or think about waiting while I
Mm.
go park? The one on the left or the right?
Maybe the one right? I think so,
Yeah, of
yeah.
course. Yeah, that's that. I had a friend Photoshop in. And what happens when there's the Matisse-like print, your brain makes you look at the print and you don't look down the street. When there's not the art, your brain looks down the street and doesn't look at the blankness. That's what's so fascinating. Our brain is hardwired to avoid blankness. The business world knows this, they study it. And then what you can do is what's called multimodality. You add other things on top of eye tracking. So this is software that measures how many times people smiled. So in this case, the dots aggregating 10 people where they looked, and it's paired with a graph below which shows when 4 people smiled as they looked at this. It's using different software to pair eye tracking with facial expression analysis. Facial expression analysis software measures how your muscles move as you look at something. So here's this one. So this is really wild. You can see here that where people were smiling, 5 people smiled when most of the dots were here. Isn't that fascinating? You can actually see, they may not even remember smiling, but with facial expression analysis, you can actually see how their muscles are moving. When you smile, your eyebrows go up, your lips go up. They can see they did this. Isn't this fun? So you can actually see when people smiled. It's pretty fun. Um, yeah, let me go back to that page. Yeah. So and that's pretty powerful software. This is called Emotion by a company named Facet. Apple thought this was pretty good software, so they bought it and took it off the market in 2016. The trillion-dollar companies understand that you have to understand human experience. And so you want to get the latest tech that allows you to do that. In the meantime, a couple of years around the same time, a software from MIT Media Lab called Affectiva rolled out. That is still available. So we can still do facial expression analysis, just not with this software. So what you can start to see is that when you use these tools is how people actually look at buildings. So a lot of modern buildings look like this. This is in New York. And where do you think people will look? This is a public library. Any ideas where people will look walking towards this
Um,
library?
maybe that lady doing yoga on the right. I don't
You
know.
got it. That's it. That's exactly where they look.
That's what I saw first, at least.
Yeah, that's where you look first. Yeah, they looked exactly at the so. And I thought, as an architect, that I thought, oh well, the reflections will intrigue people's curiosity. Nope, they didn't look. They looked at the lady on the right. They looked at the red light. They looked at the contrasting bus. Um, and then this is so this is the same results, but presented in a different way, so you can see what people are looking at. This is called a shadow study, and it shows how much people really, really were looking at the lady. They really focused on the ad. You've designed a public facility that non-consciously the brain is hardwired to ignore, which probably isn't too is probably not very smart. This is very famous. The tallest building in New England, built in 1976, all glass. And a real estate company about 10 years ago bought it. And they hired a French artist to do an installation of a guy floating on a barge in a river in France. And so then we eye tracked it, and that's where people looked. They ignore the building. They focus a lot actually on the traditional architecture of the of the of the church here. Where they really focus, this was brilliant advertising, because what happens, this is the side of the building that faces the highway going into Boston. You could really see it. So what are people to look at? People. People are really hard to look at people. When I show people these images here, anyone know what was the image in the previous slide?
A smiling cup.
A smiley cup. Could you read the logo?
The logo. I didn't even see a logo.
Right,
No,
right.
I saw
So
writing in
the,
red,
It
but I
seems to
couldn't
be
really
like
read it.
you're right, you can't read it. Well, so now you
Oh,
understand how Apple designs their ads.
Hmm.
It takes the brain 60,000 times longer to read text than see an image. So the Apple logo doesn't even say Apple, it just shows an apple. It's really fun. So that's it. Again, understanding how the non-conscious works.
Hmm. That's a good
What
point.
you really see is the brain is hardwired as a social species to see faces. This guy's Giuseppe Arcimboldo, his work is in the Louvre. And what's so interesting about this is you can see this as an upside down face, but it's a little bit more confusing to look at like this. This you see immediately as a face. Why? The human brain devotes more area to face recognition than recognition of any other visual object. This is the Nobel Prize winning neuroscientist, Eric Kandel, a retired Columbia University professor. This is his book. If you really want to understand how the human brain works, he explains neuroscience and he applies it to art. Um, and what he says is there's a template that looks like a face in your brain before you're even born. And so buildings that match that template or art that match that template will immediately grab your eye. Okay. The guys at Amazon know exactly what book cover works and which one doesn't, because they know how many people click on which kind of cover. The number one thing people click on is a book cover with a face. So a lot of books, like Barack Obama's book and Hillary Clinton's book, they have a big picture of their face on them. Even the Amazon logo, it's a smile. It's not random. We're hardwired to look for facial expressions. And my first edition of my book, we eye tracked it, and for the second edition, we put the faces right there, because that's when we eye tracked it. That's exactly where people not consciously look. That's the big idea. Okay, it's not random. Big businesses all over the world, it's faces, because that's what we see fastest. If you, no matter what you're selling, whether it's baby food, whether it's oatmeal, whether it's software, you're going to have a face as your logo. It's what we're built to see. And this is really fun. I've asked people from around the world before my talk to just draw a house like they're 5 years old. Or if a 5 year old comes up to you and say, hey, Dad, draw me a house. What do you draw? And then tell me what country you're from. And Turkey, India, Italy, Spain, Russia, Serbia, China, Zambia, they all drew the same thing. Why? Because it's non-conscious, the figural primitive. Remember, the non-conscious directs you. This pattern is already in your brain. And so a lot of famous architecture, whether it is the Taj Mahal in India, whether it is the canal houses in Amsterdam, they look the same. Okay. Car companies study facial expressions. It's not random, it looks like a face. they know you're going to non-consciously be attracted to the BMW. It's pretty fun. And this is from a computer science magazine. I asked him if I could use this, and this is what he said. This is a computer scientist. The perception of faces or face-like patterns is more critical than previously thought for how humans perceive aesthetics of the environment and the architecture of house facades. So the reason is computer scientists are designing robots. To design a good robot, you have to know how humans work. Humans are hardwired without conscious control to look for faces all the time. And the computer scientists know that. The car companies know that. The architects aren't taught that. Get the gap, guys? Do you see it? You see it in our lives. The architects don't know that. And so when you understand the science, it makes sense. Like this is in Salamanca, Spain. It's a World Heritage Site. It's a medieval church. The church was very powerful then, and the 12 apostles look like they're looking at you. People were mostly illiterate in the Middle Ages. It makes perfect sense. Why this architecture has lasted 500 years makes perfect sense. And it's now a World Heritage Site. And then this is an Apple store. They're using the same science, the 12 apostles of Apple, right? Look at that. And this is an Apple store a couple years later, the same thing, doing the same thing. No big text, just people looking at you. And the store itself is designed. What do you see in an Apple store? People. This is a quote from Steve Jobs. The broader one's understanding of the human experience, the better design we will have. Steve Jobs hired his first PhD neuroscientist to direct the design of Apple in 1975. So that's what's really interesting. So why do you think our brain unconsciously prioritizes seeing people and reading faces all the time? Why are we so into faces?
I mean, following the same logic, I mean that's the first thing that gets sort of imprinted on the subconscious when one comes to this world is basically the face, like of the mother and
Yeah, the mother, the
basically
face.
mother, father.
Right,
Yeah.
right. That's definitely true. You have to connect to your parent or you die, but the basic answer is survival.
Oh, nice. Someone said survival actually in the chat. Like survival, emotional what? Emotional attachment? Emotional attachment. I don't know. Does that count as an answer?
Yeah, well, most mammals they think we're hardwired if because the brain and body we have is not modern. This is from a Harvard Business Review article from 20 years ago. The uncomfortable truth. Humans are not modern, but Stone Age. Humans remain Pleistocene. Our brains and body haven't changed for 40,000 years. This is the quote. You could take the person out of the Stone Age, but you can't take the Stone Age out of the person. Apple knows that. The car companies know that. That's why they're designing things that look like faces. Or you walk into the Apple store, what do you really see? Just people. That's what we're built to see. Okay, because we're built to be tribal, we're built to be with each other. They all know that. What happens if a building doesn't have a face? This is a building at Harvard, and I see people from Europe and Asia in tour buses. The tour buses stop right next to this building so people can take a selfie with this building. Right. So if a building doesn't have a face, it usually gets one. This is Bilbao, a famous building by Frank Gehry in Spain. And what happened is before they opened it, the museum director said, wait a minute, people won't know where to look. And so they hired Jeff Koons to do a giant puppy with a big face in front of the museum before it opened. That's so that people know where to go. Human perception is relational. We're a social species. We're built to be mirrored. We're built to be seen by each other. So the big question I had going to architecture school in the 20th century was, why did modern architecture become so blank and hard to look at? That made no sense to me. So on the left is a building that was originally a 19th century carriage house. Today it's actually a school. It's part of a school. And on the right is a modern library built in the 21st century in the city of New York. And when you run this through software that predicts, called 3M visual attention software, which predicts how people will look at it, what first glance, you could see that non-consciously people will immediately look at the building, like at the building, at the face, at the center of the building, at the windows and the door. Whereas the building, the public facility they built, people look at the fire hydrant. You see where the reddest dot is? It's the fire hydrant. The book dropped the edge of the building. They basically ignore the building. In English, we have a statement, out of sight, out of mind. People aren't going to make a memory of this building. They're not going to think of it. Okay. So how did modern architecture happen? So who are the fathers of modern architecture?
Um, to be honest, I know their names, but it's honestly against my will because I hate them with all my life. I'm just yeah, I'm very much familiar with Le Corbusier, but I think Gropius and Van der Rohe. Those
That's
two I haven't
exactly
checked
right.
out much. I haven't checked out much about them, but I know they're equally bad, if not worse. I think Le Corbusier's idea with Paris, it just
Right,
ruined
right.
my
Well,
day.
what's so interesting is they're born about the end of the 19th century when massive changes both born at the same time. And they both pass away in the 60s. And when they're both in their almost 30 in their mid 20s, what happens? We have World War One. And we have World War One, and so that is it. So we have World War One, and um, 20 million deaths, industrialized warfare, mass starvation of bloodbath of unprecedented proportions. It basically the world collapsed after World War One, and so they experienced it. Gropius served in it. So did Mies van der Rohe. This is really interesting to celebrate the centennial of World War One. John Singer Sargent was paid by the British government to go around and sketch the soldiers and American and US soldiers fighting in World War One. And then 1919 in London, he did this painting of World War One. The first tanks were invented in World War One, and he did a watercolor of the tank. Right. Okay. And so then what you also learn is that this is what we have started to learn. This is 21st century. More than 20% of soldiers suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. 10 million soldiers died. This is from a Yale University professor. And what we can now do, this is again 21st century science. The first magnetic resonance imaging allows you to see soft tissue in the brain. X-rays only allow you to see bones. This allows you to see soft tissue. And you can see here how the brain shrinks with PTSD. And that really matters. What you can see here, your body goes into a different mode. Your body stays in danger mode. It fragments your fragmented relationship with yourself and others. You dissociate. That's what happens. PTSD rewires the brain. Okay. And again, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, wasn't even a word doctors knew until 1980. That's 10 years after the founding fathers died. The big idea, PTSD changes your brain. This is Bessel van der Kolk, a world famous doctor who's written the book, The Body Keeps Score, how much PTSD gets transmitted in families over 3 generations and how it changes your brain and risk experience. Reality is a construct between eye and brain. Not only the way we live, but specifically the way we choose to build our buildings reflects hidden internal brain design that we may not know we carry, yet unconsciously are always responding to. All right, that's the big idea. So Walter Gropius founded the Bauhaus, was hired by Harvard to teach modern architecture. They didn't know when they hired him that he had post-traumatic stress disorder. Walter Gropius served 4 years on the Western Front. His captain was shot in front of him. He was part of a cohort of over 100 men, half of whom would die in 6 months. His PTSD is architecture. This is the building he built on the left when he was first hired at Harvard. This is a World War I trench. And you can see this is called reenactment. That's the term they now use, where non-consciously your brain trying to heal from the trauma makes you recreate it in a way. So the World War One bunker is what it is, looks a little bit like the house. It's kind of shaped similarly. So key founding fathers, Gropius, Mies, Neutra, World War One vets with PTSD. So it's a direct expression of their trauma. Okay. So that's it. This is now a historic site in Belgium, and I think the bodies of the World War One soldiers are still buried underneath it. And now, so with PTSD, with post-traumatic stress disorder, you become disembodied, as do your buildings. So to survive after trauma, you have to kind of separate from internal feelings. And so your buildings do too. So this is the house opposite of Gropius's house. It looks, you can find the door, it's top, middle, and bottom. You know this is a house. On the right, what is this? This is now a part of a historic site. You can visit it. And they tell a story of how a woman once came in here and said, "Is this a gas station?" You don't know what it is. Okay. So this was built 20 years after Gropius served in the World War I trenches. Okay. And the amazing thing about post-traumatic stress disorder, you often lose vision because so many cells in your brain, half of your brain is devoted to visual processing. The cells have died, so you can't take in detail. So this explains why, one of the reasons why, there are other reasons too, one of the reasons why modern architecture became so blank. Oh, this is hysterical too. You walk into the house and the section, his study is exactly like a World War I trench, where no one can see you unless you stand up. Again, it's reenactment. Your brain is recreating the trauma. And then his bedroom, in the trenches, the men would sleep in a dugout. There'd be a sturdy doorway and they'd sleep in there. They wouldn't sleep in the trench itself. And so what Gropius did, which is kind of wild, is he recreated the same thing. He creates a corridor in the bedroom, a sturdy doorway, and then just the bed. It's called reenactment. Interior wall construction mimics trench interior construction. There's a randomness. This is a reconstructed trench at the American Heritage Foundation in Greater Boston. And there's kind of a randomness in the way things are put up in a trench. When people are about to kill you, you go a little random. When you walk into the Gropius's house, you see horizontal house, exterior cladding placed vertically. What? It makes no sense. But it fits with how people would design in World War I presented this at a medical conference, Modern Architecture, a Direct Expression of Trauma in World War I Trench. It was a little bit traumatizing for me because I got no pushback. So I was speaking to top medical professionals, and this is what they said. I showed them the same slides I just showed you of Gropius's house. If you never told me you lived here, I could tell this person has been traumatized, said Michael Kramer, clinical psychologist at the New York Harbor Healthcare System in New York. It's a house built for safety. It's classic PTSD. Every trauma expert we contacted said the same view. With the house parallels you show, it's obvious, said Jim Hopper, trauma teaching associate at Harvard Medical School. And looking at Gropius's house as a direct expression of how trauma works. Added Ashley Dukas, PhD, clinical psychologist at the World Trade Center, NYU School of Medicine. Okay. And what about Le Corbusier? So the basic founding fathers had PTSD. They served in World War I. And again, they talked about shell shock in World War I, but they didn't understand post-traumatic stress disorder until, 50 years later. What about Le Corbusier? Le Corbusier was too blind. He had too visually impaired to serve in World War I. These are examples of his buildings, which are copied all over the world. But now I read a book about him in 2008 that explains, by Nicholas Fox Weber, that explains he's likely on the autism spectrum. Autism is a neurodevelopment disorder characterized by repetitive behaviors and impaired social interactions. And so Le Corbusier came up with 5 points of architecture for the 20th century without ever doing any evidence-based design. And without ever doing any preference studies, he just came up with it. And today, these are still taught in American architecture schools. It's crazy. And these are the doctors who have corroborated his autism spectrum diagnosis. And what's so interesting, though, is now in the 21st century, we're in a new age, right, where we can understand human experience. You can now do eye tracking. They can now do eye tracking of infants at 12 months to determine if or where they are on the autism spectrum. So I had 30 people, neurotypical people, look at this picture of a cat on a notebook, and one person in the autism spectrum look at the picture. Which is which?
I would probably say the one with the face is the normal one, right?
Right. 30 people on the neurotypical people looked at it, and I didn't tell them what to do. That's where they looked. The one person in the autism spectrum, that's where he looked. So that's it. And then when you look at, you can go on the web. There are lots of websites about this. And this is the book, the 2008 book I read by Nicholas Fox Weber that explains Le Corbusier's autism. So even if you show people a picture in the savannah of elephants, an autistic person will look away from the face, whereas a neurotypical people without conscious awareness control try to immediately look where the eyes are. And then this is the same study. We had 30 neurotypical people look at the blanker building. The autistic person could look right at the blankness. And you can see this. So it makes sense that Le Corbusier would design like this. It'd be very confusing for a neurotypical person to look at this. For someone on the autism spectrum, it's much easier to look at. So how did modern architecture happen? Relationally compromised people with atypical fixations on emotional regulation, basically mostly with PTSD. Le Corbusier had autism, came up with the architectural approach, abetted by a wounded world, World War I, rushing to bury the past, and an economic power structure all too willing to profit from it. You have to understand other things happened. By the 1950s, you get new ways of making glass. You can make curtain wall construction. It's cheaper to build big with curtain walls. Curtain walls are all blank. And modern architecture supported that construction. You can read more about this in the mental disorders that gave us modern architecture, as well as in my book, Cognitive Architecture. Okay. So the impact of World War I, its trauma gave us modern architecture. That's why buildings started to look like this. Architecture becomes avoided. It's no longer about relationships. It's an external expression of atypical internal brain structure. It will always be confusing for a neurotypical person to walk towards this building. Now, 100 years from now, it just will. So we call this the 21st century paradigm shift, understanding how the non-conscious directs you. So these are all buildings in Greater Boston. Most of them are under historic bylaws. You're not allowed to even change them. They want to maintain them. But you can see what do they look like, guys? They look like faces. And that's what we're built to see. That's what humans are built to see. So you're going to immediately find the door very easily in these buildings, unlike most modern buildings where often it's very hard to find the door. There's a lot of new understanding about our brain that's impacting many disciplines, including medicine. This was written by a doctor in 2018. When you know the mechanism, you can use that way in understanding to drastically improve the human condition. That is how you spark a revolution. You shift the frame, you change the lens, and all at once the world is revealed and nothing is the same. Okay. And she's writing about how trauma changes a person's lifespan, changes how you see the world. Okay. I present this at architectural conferences, and the learning objectives are explain the importance of the human unconscious in our perception of architecture and planning, see how biometric modeling, including eye tracking, can be used as a tool to assess design because it will tell you non-consciously what people are going to be doing, how they're going to respond. Demonstrate the extent the human brain is oriented to visual processing, geared to take in faces. We're face architects before we're architects. Understand reality as a construct between your eye and brain. Traditional architecture mirrors externally the hidden internal brain design. It expresses the human need to be seen and mirrored to feel at our best. It expresses how mammals co-regulate. It's how we run ourselves. Okay. You can learn more in this book. It came out in 2021. Stay curious and thank you. This is the big idea that you really have to understand, and this is what the car companies and all the business world knows. Because of our brain architecture is essentially primitive. Hasn't changed since the Pleistocene. We're hardwired to read emotions first. What happens is something comes in, and because of it, there's called a thalamus, that can alert the amygdala. That's the part of your brain that will release a primitive part of your brain that releases stress hormones, releases cortisol if it sees something stressful before you even know what you're looking at. This is the big idea. So before you maybe even know what you're looking at, your facial expressions, your pupil dilation, your respiration, your sweat glands, your heart rate are already responding. And if it weren't like that, you couldn't have survived on the savannah. And that's how we're still designed. That's the big idea. So you can learn more at our nonprofit. We just updated our website about understanding how human experience works. Yeah. Okay. Oh, these are some of the studies we've done. This is from a Harris poll where they asked if people like traditional or modern buildings for civic architecture, for government buildings. And 72% of 2,000 people in the poll said they preferred traditional architecture. And then what you could do is you can run them through an eye tracking study. And maybe one reason why is non-consciously people can look at this one more easily. We didn't tell them where to look. That's where their brain makes them look. It fits us biologically. Okay. So I think I can stop now. Was that okay?
That was amazing, honestly. Yeah. And I think me and Muhammad will give you a couple questions now and then give the audience the chance to ask questions too. So I think I'll go first. You mentioned that our world has been shaped through warfare and PTSD, but wouldn't you agree that it was primarily the men that went to war and got the PTSD? Wouldn't the women that saw the ugly architecture or maybe the change in architecture have a voice in, let's say, the way we built the cities? I feel like
Yeah,
the
well, with
majority.
PTSD, it's not even PTSD. You could just knowing people that died and the mass death. The society collapsed after World War One. 20 years later, World War Two, it collapses again. And there's a desire, now that we understand that the human brain works, that is a desire, if something happens horrible, forget the past, start from zero. So even if you weren't on the front, you could still get PTSD. Being surrounded by people who died, having your children die, that could still give you the trauma, even if you actually weren't holding the gun. You could
Hmm.
still get
Oh,
PTSD. PTSD is much easier to understand, to get, than people realize, and it's much more common. The book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, kind of explains that. But they didn't, again, that book didn't come out till what, 2012 or something. So again, or 2014, they didn't know about that. Again, it's 21st century thinking, understanding how we see the world like an animal, understanding we don't have a modern brain, understanding there's great science that's now done by Arnold Wilkins in the UK about how the brain gets headaches looking at repetitive parallel lines of buildings. They're really not good for you to be around them. Um, so
interesting. My next question actually has to do with the architecture in hand that we have today. So, not like you mentioned, a lot of the other schools, like the business schools and whatnot, they're using eye tracking to make stuff attractive, and inherently, anything attractive makes them more money in the long term, of
yes,
course. Wouldn't it make more sense for architects to use these eye tracking technology to at least make their buildings, even if it's modernist in style, to make it, let's say, more attractive?
oh,
Why
definitely.
do these schools ignore it?
They don't know it's there.
No way, come on. There's internet
They don't know.
everywhere.
I just gave a talk at the in April. I spoke at the architecture school in Venice, IUAV, in Venice. I spoke at the Alicante Architecture School in Spain. And then I spoke at the Worcester Polytechnic Institute School of Architecture in central Massachusetts. And the teachers weren't taught it. They don't know it's there. They don't know it's there. And to become a licensed architect, there was no psychology requirement, no biology requirement to get a master's in architecture or to take your licensing exam. So architects are trained that people are mechanical
Interesting. Then how come the business schools were able to basically hop on the wagon very early compared to, let's say, architects
because
and
they
engineers?
need to make, they know what you just said, actually, Amar. There's a phrase they use, attention is currency.
Mm,
They have to understand the car companies, what the biggest, this is what terrifies me. The biggest purchasers of all eye tracking tools and biometric tools are the car companies. Why? They have to understand the client.
mm.
So architects don't have much control. And yeah, and it's really weird. So the business world, when they're designing a package, when they're designing a car, they really think about emotions. Whereas the architecture world doesn't even look at it, and they don't even look at the past. But when you understand human history in a way that makes sense, if something really is horrible happened in your family, people often don't talk about it, right? That's very common. It's very common. Um, and the 20th century had a lot of horrible things. The 21st century is having horrible things now too. We
As of
don't
now
want
as well,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, we're recreating it, right? There's a great Buddhist quote by a famous Buddhist teacher, Daisaku Aikida. A healthy version of the future is not possible without an accurate knowledge of the past. But because of its traumatic, my parents never told me things about the family. I found out only after they passed away. They never. But I think the modern generation, your generation, and younger people are just really interested in understanding. Are there eye tracking tools? Yeah, you can assist. There are lots of eye tracking tools. There's lots you can use to assist in design. There's 3M Visual Attention Software is AI software, a plugin for Photoshop, which will show how
Can we have
people
it
look at
typed in
anything.
actually so people can like write it down, type it in. So
Um,
just in case. So I actually
sure.
want to use it too.
Yeah, sure. We could do another talk
Or if you can
sometime.
spell it out, like we can, yeah, if you spell it out, you can basically type it up if you
I
wish.
could type it up,
Yeah, that's easy for you too.
3M
Yeah.
Visual Attention Software. I think it's vas.3m.com.
Wow, that's amazing.
And you can also go on our website, thehappy.org, and you can see we have a whole class 6 is free, and it's all about how to use the software. There's also iMotions Online. That's more complicated. That's to actual do. iMotions, they do where you do an actual study. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to overstep my time. It's already almost, I
It's
think,
fine. I'm gonna be here for like the next 3 hours talking about architecture, so that's fine.
yeah.
Mohammed, do you have any questions before we continue to
I
the?
uh, I have a question, but also I want to give a chance to our audience to ask questions. I think Suhaib might have had a question. If he's unavailable, I'm happy to ask
Yeah,
my.
thank you for that. I'm available. First, I would like to thank you to people and especially thank to Madam Ann for sharing such a thought-provoking presentation and especially the very special part of the architecture which normally in these days I have been neglected since a long time. As my question regarding this whole presentation was when we talk about the war and the consumerism theory, like how the war impact or enhance the use of the materials or things like at a peak level. So how it impact in a way that human psychology is impacted by the use of by the concept of the consumerism. I think so. Sorry about the pronunciation, but it's something like we are in the race of using the things a lot of at a bigger value rather than just before in the traditional time. In the old time, we are not very attached to the materials and things. But after the World War II, things have been shifted too much into the things. Uh, so how it's impacted?
Well, I think also after World War II, 1950 to 1970 was a huge economic boom. And again, new technologies. You got aluminum that could hold up, you got plate glass for curtain wall construction. That all came. You could build faster without the detail, and modern architecture supported that approach. Um, the idea, I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but our world is a combination of, technology, war, culture, they all work together, it all comes together. I read something recently that because of World War I, the Germans became expert at ferro concrete construction. Because they built so many bunkers and trenches, they got really, really good at building with concrete. And then in the 1960s, we get brutalism with big concrete buildings. I think there might be a connection between the war, building so many trenches and bunkers, and suddenly big concrete buildings. So we learn new ways of building. So a lot of new technologies came in, and what happened is they didn't study human psychology the way the car companies do. They have to because they know it's very competitive, the car industry, and they know to keep people driving, they have to keep them comfortable. And the irony there is, I once went to a lecture at Harvard, and an evolutionary biologist there explains the male body, you got to know this, guys, evolved to walk 12 miles a day. How many kilometers is that?
That's like what, maybe 18, I think, or like
Yeah,
16.
18. The female body
Oh my
evolved to
God.
walk nine miles a day. So, like, we're built for walking. And now they know that if you don't walk that much every day, you're more likely to get obesity, depression. And now, this is wild, the new science, they can predict when you'll get Alzheimer's or dementia. That if you don't walk at least 4,000 steps a day, they can predict statistically when you'll get Alzheimer's or dementia. So we're
How
built
come?
for because
Legs and.
we're built for walking. And
Hmm.
when you walk, the pounding on the ground sends the blood flow to the brain, keeping it alive. We're not built
And
for
what,
sitting down. We're built for
and
walking. And so I lived in Paris in my 20s for 5 years. It was so
Lucky
easy
you.
to walk. In Manhattan, also, it's very easy to walk. But in most parts of America, it's very difficult to walk. After World War II, they built it around cars, which are not good for us.
Hmm.
We're built for walking. Now,
mm,
America, we have the lowest longevity rate of any developed country. It's 44th in the world of longevity, expected by 2050 to be 66th, I think. We're meant to be walking and meeting people and being seen. We're a social species and not just seeing each other over Zoom. I mean, that's okay, but we're meant to be seen. We're meant to be, that they know that now. So
and
we
that's
have,
where the
Yeah.
So in just cutting you down. So that's why and the traditional cities was based on a radius of 1 kilometer or maybe 1 mile, because they have to keep on people in their in the walkable zone, so they can work in the same area, they can
Yeah.
have the education in the same area, they have the market everything in the same area. But eventually, when we have the motors after the World War II, and we start having the consuming the vehicle for our own transportation, it's again shifted towards a and to a never-ending thing, which eventually ends up into a situation where we're in a situation where there's no emotions, no thinking, no like relation to anything. So
No,
that's very
no.
important, and that's
Right.
what I just thinking about all the time during the presentation. Like the war eventually ended us onto the part of the consumerism, where
Yes.
we lead to the point where we stop having the connection with the buildings, we stop having the connection with the nature.
Exactly. We start having connection. Exactly right. We don't have connections building. We don't have connections to the place. It just doesn't fit us. It doesn't fit us. And what happening too in my lifetime, what I've seen is now the rich get beauty.
And
You
ma'am,
know.
there was one more question regarding this also thing. Like when you were just showing me the all the presentation, where you were just saying that the people were smiling to the building, or the prints which they were seeing, or especially in the traditional buildings, they're focused on the more familiar elements of the building, especially the
Exactly.
sculpture, because it's quite close to the human figure and human
Right.
itself.
Yeah,
himself.
we have to be nature preset what we need to see. Even my
Yeah,
cat, when my cat gets up in the morning, the first thing he looks at is me. You know, he looks right. Mammals always look for each other.
yeah. But the point is like in traditional perspective or traditional realm, that it's all and onto the point of the beauty or something like, which is something very related to only that surface level sort of thing, or it's something which is beyond that beauty. That's very alarming question in today's perspective, because now what I have been observing, and which I have been looking at the work of the people, or maybe looking at the search of the people, it's just ended at the point that the things must seem to be beautiful to the eye, should look very rich in design, which should have some ornamentation, should look very interesting, rather than having the plain facades and glass facades and
It
something like
shouldn't be
that.
all, no, it shouldn't be all glass facade. No, no.
Yeah, but the point is like this debate only end that on the point of the beauty, or is this something beyond that beauty?
I think what happens is, remember, I think I showed you that slide that before you consciously know what you're looking at, your body's
Mhm.
already responding. Your heart rate, your breath rate, your pupil dilation. So you're designing for your body, and it's nature is preset what we need to see. So again, I was an American girl at 12 years old who went to see the Taj Mahal. It was beautiful. Makes no sense. Makes perfect sense. It fits what I need to see. Um, it's preset what we need to see.
If I can just
Thank you,
butt in
man.
for a
Thank you.
second. Sorry, Sahib. Please forgive me, Sahib. And my question for you also is that most of your examples are within the, let's say, the Western point of view, the Western buildings. Do you think the same idea can also be
Yeah, of course. You've
the
got to
same?
send me pictures. Send me pictures. We could do the same thing. Of course, it's exactly the same. I have other pictures that show buildings. Oh my God, I have other pictures. I already have that. Yeah, we've done that.
Do you have
I
like
have
one of
pictures.
like somewhere like in China or like Japan or Korea,
Yeah, I
somewhere
have
there?
Japan. I have that. I have that. Japan, China. I have pictures of those already. They're all face-like. Top,
All
middle,
right,
and
nice.
bottom, bilaterally symmetrical detail. We have pictures of that. Yeah, we definitely have that. Yeah, I have to find it for you, but I think it's
By the way, if anyone has any questions from the spectators, please don't be shy to ask or like turn on your camera if you want, by the way. If you don't, usually people get like, camera shy when the video is not recording anymore. That's when they turn on the camera, usually.
yeah, right. No, that's fine. That's fine. But yeah, I have a whole slide about buildings around the world that are all face-like. They have to be. The face bias is really is it this one or is it here? I think it's this one. Oh yeah, look at these. Oh,
And
this
if
is
you want to
fun.
share it with us also so we can see it, so
Okay,
people
okay,
can
here you
relate to
go. I can
the.
show it to you really quickly. I can show it to you really
Yeah,
quickly
please.
here.
Yeah.
Here we go. I can show you really quickly. This is fun too. Um, can you see?
Yeah.
Yes,
This
we
is from
do. Yeah.
this is online. This is from my course, but you can see hidden biological biases. It's face-like, it's bilaterally symmetrical. And that's because animals are that way. They're bilaterally symmetrical, top, middle, and bottom. And so here's Rome, 1570. Here's Japan, same thing. Here's the White House, 1800. You know, here's Palladio's building. Here's more examples of it. Eiffel Tower. This is
Yeah.
Boston.
And
Boston. Look at
I
style, Art Deco. Yeah.
yeah, after basically after like Anne stop sharing, I'll share also like a picture maybe of a really famous building in Egypt, and
Oh, that sounds
it's
great. That sounds great. And,
iconic,
and,
and it
and
has
this
that
is what
symmetry aspect.
Prince Charles did before he was king. He started rebuilding this. This is what he did before he was king. So
Nice.
that's it. And then when you ask people to draw a house, remember I showed you that? They're doing that. They do this. It's preset what we need to see. Oh, and this is funny. This is Disneyland. Disneyland is on like I think 5 countries, 3 continents. These are the buildings. It's pretty funny.
Very, very
Okay.
beautiful too.
Yeah,
No, I think
that's
point well taken. I think I completely understand it. I think if you don't mind, I can ask you maybe a follow-up question on that regard. So when we're saying faces, we're also talking about nature, not necessarily faces. We're talking about the proportions in nature. We're talking about basically what we can relate to in nature when we see some kind of a tree. You can see clearly that this is the root, this is the trunk, and these are like the branches, the
you're right.
leaves. Your mind is quickly connecting to these means. You can understand it like automatically. And I think it's a point well taken. And I think we're really missing out on seeing that. So that's my first question. Faces for nature. So there is a correspondence. So you're saying it's really about nature rather than just the human face, which is
Well,
symmetrical
no,
when you have one side and the other.
the brain is a face attack first. Faces and
Okay.
nature. It's not one or,
Okay.
but brain is a face attack first because you're not designed to be alone. We couldn't have
Yeah.
survived on the savannah. We evolved in Africa. We couldn't have survived there. Remember, architecture isn't that old.
Yeah.
We're hardwired, we're animals, and we're hardwired to see each other. And we're hardwired to work
Um,
together as a team. So it's faces, but faces and nature. And our body is, we evolved with trees. So you know why our hands go like this? Why do our hands go like this?
to hold things and to be able
To
like to have
hold
a
what? There
good
was
grip.
something very specific to hold. What were we holding? What is this?
Uh,
Rocks,
What?
maybe tools.
rocks.
How, maybe tools? A spear?
Tree branch.
Oh, okay. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Tree branch, because we evolved from monkeys. We share 95% or more of our DNA with monkeys. Monkeys
Wait a
run
minute. Wait
up
a
a
minute.
tree. We run
And
up.
let's not get this a bit twisted. You're talking to like a Muslim majority audience. So let's assume God has given us some DNA. You know what I mean?
No, but
Yeah,
I
Maybe
mean,
yeah,
not
like
all
but
of you.
no,
it's
it's
also
because,
she's
but it's
entitled
not
to say what
about
she thinks.
religion. It's not about religion. It's about what we are. We're of nature. God created nature. This is
Yeah,
of
true.
nature. God created
But
nature,
but can I ask?
this
Yeah.
is so we're walking around every day ready to grab a branch.
Yeah.
If trees didn't exist, you could not have a hand that went like this.
So can I follow up with another question? Since basically we're talking about the beautiful architecture really disappearing in the 20th century, right? And we're talking specifically about the war. The war was really the event that is kind of like the critical sort of moment in which, like, after which we don't see beautiful architecture anymore. We see more utilitarian architecture, or these kind of like disturbed sort of plans and facades and really
But
strange
it's
things that.
also economics, money. Remember, so many people died. 20 million World War One, 60 million World War Two. A
So a
need to
lot of crafts
rebuild.
were lost.
A lot of, but then also new industries came in. There
Yeah.
wasn't in 1850. You couldn't do plate glass like you can do now. New
But people were
industries.
not also interested in the plate glass, like the facade glass front. They were not really as interested because they
Yeah,
would
but
have built differently, wouldn't they?
they would have built. But I think there was mass. Yeah, there was the mass death of the arts and crafts class.
That's a
And
point.
then a need to rebuild. We needed to rebuild. And I think when your past is traumatic, you do want to forget the past. Well, if
Yeah.
things are really traumatic, when you study
But
how humans respond to
because
trauma.
like it's really interesting because like the World War One and World War Two affected different places differently. Even though like
Yep.
my country, I come from Egypt, and it definitely affected Egypt. There were major battles that took place in Egypt, not very far from Cairo as well, such as Al Alamein. It's about maybe 300 or 250 kilometers away from Cairo. Yet the entirety of Cairo is not really destroyed. And yet, with the 1960s, there was definitely a trend to adopt that kind of modernist architecture.
Right,
You
right.
see
It
it in
was
the
so
Cairo
right,
Tower. So
right, right.
my point being related to the absence of religion, not just religion as in like the kind of the laws of it, or in the sense of like how do you pray? You pray in that way, but also in the sense that we're not connecting with higher meanings anymore. That's why you have the absence also of beauty. That's my question or kind of reflection. Because with World War One and World War Two, a lot of people were also in a sense shocked, as you're saying, like the shell shock of World War One, but also like World War Two and the like atrocities and like the kind of like things that were unimaginable. They for the first time they happened at that scale very quickly. You had millions of people being killed before, but very quickly in a very short time that was really unprecedented at that time.
But
So
hold on a
in that
second.
way, people,
But
yeah,
there's one
I
thing you
want to
have to
say,
understand.
like there's
But
a disconnect with religion that kind of led to also that kind of
right,
ugliness in
but there's a
architecture. That
reason for the disconnect because
yeah, please, yeah,
society, the reason is, and
yeah,
it's a disconnect everywhere. It's also with our food sources. We started making processed food. Um, we started
absolutely, yeah,
designing cities for cars, not for
yeah,
people.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
there was the
Why do you
industrial,
think this is the case?
so it's all there's the industrialization of everything.
Okay, but why
Big
did that like?
industrialized big industrialization comes over, and industrialization doesn't think about, yeah, look, the food, look at the food. It was horrible. This processed food is very bad for you.
Yeah, of course,
They
of course.
started taking, they made bread without wheat germ in it, without the fiber in it. They made Wonder Bread. Look up Wonder Bread. Look up Wonder Bread.
Yeah,
And they made that. Why? Because they could sell more. Yeah, look at that. It was pre-sliced Wonder Bread. It's really bad for you, they now know, but it was industrialized production. Industrialized
yeah, yeah.
production, big money took over. That's what happened. And because
Mhm.
the business
So
world
did you,
loved this bread, because without the wheat germ, the bread doesn't go bad as quickly. It can stay on the
yeah,
store shelf longer.
of course, yeah, yeah, I understand. Of course,
And
they
then
still do it. They still have
and
it.
they still
I
do, they
mean,
still have it, but it's not good for you.
yeah,
They now know if you don't
that's
eat
really
wheat
bad. Yeah.
germ, you're going to get obesity. It's not good for your body. You'll more likely have heart conditions, you
Yeah.
know.
But do you like see that in terms of architecture, in terms of basically we've been talking about our recognition abilities? Do you see that relationship? Because you're definitely talking about that 20th century and the absence of religion and the discourse and the absence. Actually, as a matter of fact, people are looking with anger at religion. Of course, the 19th century was similar, but there is a kind of like a sped up
No,
trend that
yeah,
happens
but
in
I
the
also
20th.
think it was about
Would you
industrial.
see that? Mm.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing to think about. I haven't thought about it that way, but it's very interesting. There was this big industry took off, big wealth took off as never
Yeah,
before.
yeah,
And then I also think, a quick need to wanting to embrace plastics. Now we know, oh my God, some plastics don't decompose. They now have a decomposition clock for plastics. One plastic baby diaper takes 500 years to decompose. 500 years.
yeah.
And
No,
so
but the
they
problem is
now,
also like also the things that we take into our bodies as well. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, you're
look at this
completely right. I
decomposition
mean,
clock. We didn't even think about this. Yeah, it's terrible.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
crazy.
And that it's absolutely terrible. We're polluting our oceans.
yeah.
Um, but
And that's a reflection of architecture. The architecture that we have is basically that kind of
it's all part of
disturbing
that
architecture.
industrialization, the
Yeah,
industrialization, the
absolutely.
power. It's bringing industry into things that were used to be done by hand.
Yeah, yeah,
You
absolutely.
know, you know, the
Yeah,
size of a brick is that size because people could pick it up with their hand.
yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean,
And
it's
now we're
they
building
had to
things
make.
we're not building that way anymore. What we're building now is horrific.
Yeah,
We're
That's
destroying
very
our
good.
cities. Yeah, look at
Look at
this.
this.
Oh my God. Look at
So
that.
this
That's
used to be here
terrible.
since this was, this was built long, long, long before the Birmingham University. They tore down the building and then built this. I can't say what I want to say. It's on YouTube. And then, now this is being torn down too because coming from an engineering point of view, this is not structurally sound after almost half a
Right.
century. And this is like the good cases. Half a century is a lot of time for concrete buildings. And when your buildings are this ugly, no one's going to protest it when it gets torn down. The only issue is the amount of environmental harm you've done just to build this disgusting piece of, I can't say it, building this, the amount of environmental harm is insane and it's off the charts.
Yeah, it's off the charts, but they didn't, again, there was a rush to rebuild. They want, again, with PTSD, you have to understand how humans work. We do want to forget the past. And there was all these new industry technologies, and driving you know, was so cool.
But I'm gonna take a back seat, but I was wondering if like some of our audience also wanna kind of like chip in and ask questions or send them in the comments. This is a good opportunity that we have Anne, and she's giving us her precious time.
Yeah, well, I'd be
So
happy
we
to
could also
talk to
like
you.
to hear and like make benefit from that. If anyone has
Yeah.
questions or comments or insights,
Go
I
ahead,
think
Lubna.
Lubna has. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Anne, thank you so much for this super interesting presentation. You made me look at things in a completely different way, especially PTSD and mental health issues, because we've been living in an age where, uh, okay, about like breaking the stigma of mental health and so on, and that's great, but also is I don't know what's the proper word for this, but maybe the celebration of art that's coming out of mental health issues. I'm not sure if you understand what I mean or not, but uh, what we're seeing right now, apparently, we're seeing art and we're seeing architecture that's coming out of, it's emerging out of disturbances, not out of being healthy or being mentally sound. And yeah, even because I practice art, I'm in the art scene, and things, the more absurd things are, the more celebrated they are, and the more yeah, and that's uh, now it makes sense. Now things no, this is not okay, and I have to say it's not okay. Yeah, art is very therapeutic, but we have to be very careful also where it is displayed, and who is, and who this يعني, who sees this and who interacts with this. You get what I mean?
That's it. That's really a good point that we're not right. That's a really, really good point that we're not designing for basic human needs. And I think someone like Walt Disney in the 1950s in the United States, he realized that his children couldn't play on the street like he could when he was growing up, 40 years earlier, and
Mm,
because of cars. And so he created Disneyland Main Street. And when you look
yeah.
at Disneyland Main Street, it's 52. Look at these. These are all over the world. Look at this one. These are all over the world. He has, I think there's 7 Disneylands on 3 continents. There's Disneyland in Asia. There's Disneyland in Paris. And they make a walkable street. Why? Because we're not making them anymore. And
Yeah.
and the elevations are 52 different building elevations, each looks like a face, each very ornate, maximum 3 stories. So they like he really, and what he did is he sent his engineers, he called them Imagineers, to Europe to look at the streets where people were happiest,
Mm,
and he was designing for happiness, and that now people to experience happiness in a street they have to pay to go to
yeah.
Disneyland. It's crazy. We forgot. That's wrong. It's totally wrong. It's totally wrong what we did. But you have to understand our past, and they were running from horrible things, and they didn't realize that we're all part of one system, just like the people making plastics don't realize that. How are we going to take the plastics now? Oh my God, I just got a test where I could test the amount of microplastics in my blood.
Mm, yeah.
That's crazy. You know, that's just we
Kind of
building
alarming.
this.
In the
But
blood.
that's the world we're in now. We need to. It can't just be Disneyland where people go to Disneyland to experience beauty. It should be your street.
Yeah.
Um,
I have another question if time allows. Can I?
You got 3 hours,
Okay.
Hayat. Yeah, no problem. You got 3 hours.
Okay, great. Okay, so do you think colonialism has the same impact on architecture like wars or because okay, so right now I feel like in Egypt, for example, colonialism has an impact on how not only architecture but how we're functioning as a society in many things. So colonialism has the same impact, right? Or
oh, sure, definitely.
right? Hmm.
Right. Wow, parts of Cairo look like Paris. That's
Well,
really, yeah,
there was a like the ruler of Egypt in the 19 I'm sorry, in the 1860s had this vision to build the Paris on the Nile, and he literally called it Paris on the Nile. That was it, the Haussmannian
that's incredible.
basically
So that's what it
architecture.
looks like. Yeah, right.
Yeah, that is,
But
and they had to
but to
demolish, but that's Lobna's point as well. Like they had to demolish a lot of basically the traditional buildings to be able to put these buildings in their place. Even
yeah,
though these
that's not
buildings
a
are
good
really
idea.
beautiful, I consider these the Haussmannian buildings to be really
Those are the
beautiful.
best buildings. They're
To what came
beautiful.
after, to what came after,
It's
uh,
hideous.
yeah, to what came
But
after is really hideous. But what was before was really just magnificent. We just have very few buildings
right,
left,
right. But what
especially houses.
they did
Houses like
the
the
houses.
traditional
That's what
house.
they did. They did the same thing in the United States. They tore down the houses to put in highways and modern buildings.
Yeah, yeah. If
Not
Ammar can
and
type Arab traditional house in Cairo, maybe you can see like courtyard house, just to give you an idea of what I mean, or Damascus or something. You'll be able to see the difference between the houses. Yeah.
yeah, they're
So you can see
beautiful.
the courtyards. I mean, the
Yeah.
cemetery is really, really
And
important.
look how face like it is. It looks like a face.
Yeah, I mean, cemetery, like you have like basically that kind of mirroring effect. You have like
Yeah,
you're as
mirroring
if you're
effect. That's
standing
what
in
we
front of
need.
a,
Right. We need
yeah,
the human
yeah,
brain is hardwired to be mirrored, so it needs to
yeah,
see buildings that look like faces.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so
With
that
that said, yeah. With that said, I'm afraid I have to get moving within a couple of minutes. So I just wanted to thank Anne again and Ammar and everybody
thank
for
you.
making
Well,
it today.
let's
Yeah,
stay in touch, guys.
absolutely.
Let's get a
Yeah.
grant from the United Nations. There's lots more we can get out there. We need to build a better world. And so stay in touch, and happy to speak again.
Yeah,
Will
absolutely.
do.
I'll end the
Okay.
record right now,
Thank you.
actually. Okay, so
Yeah,
bye
I'm
bye.
just gonna leave, but like if Ammar is staying and people want to stay, obviously they can.
Yeah, I'm here until
But
everyone's done.
it
Yeah,
has
so
been a
yeah, I'm
pleasure.
fine.
Okay.
I'll stop the recording now. Thank you. There you go. That is the end of the recording.